This is WNYC FM and AM New York and WNYC.org. Hello again, everyone. I'm Brian Lehrer, and live from the Greene space here at 160 Varick Street, it is time now for our debate between the 5 candidates running in next Tuesday's primary for New York State Attorney General. Now, listeners, if you're hearing us on the radio at this time and you're near a computer or listening on a computer, you can watch this debate right now as a live video stream on our brand new politics website, itsafreecountry.org. Itsafreecountry.org. The candidates are State Assemblyman Richard Brodsky, former federal prosecutor Sean Coffey, former state insurance superintendent Eric Dinallo, Nassau County DA Kathleen Rice, and State Senator Eric Schneiderman. A point of disclosure, Mr. Schneiderman's father, Erwin Schneiderman, who has been a significant donor to his son's campaign, is a longtime member of the WNYC Board of Trustees and has been a generous donor to the station over the years. We thought it right to disclose that relationship. Candidates, welcome to WNYC and welcome to the Greene space.
Good to be with her.
You know, first of all, most people don't even know what the State Attorney General does. They think you're like a local DA, or based on news coverage this summer, they think you decide where mosques can go. So in 45 seconds, state your own job description. What's so important about this job that New Yorkers should even care which one of you is nominated? Mr. Dinallo?
I think it's the chief legal officer for the state. So you're bringing the affirmative cases, the actions that protect New Yorkers in a variety of issues, environmental, civil rights, securities, consumer frauds, but you also are the top defense lawyer for the state. So there's all these state agencies out there, and someone has to be the lawyer to defend them in federal and state court. It's a huge responsibility. And you're also the top appellate lawyer for the state. So you go into Supreme Court and the top courts of the state, and you argue on the state's behalf in the different legal positions that are required in that job.
Mr. Coffey, what's so important about this job?
Well, it is the top legal position for the state, and it's critically important, particularly in a time where we so drastically need to get government working for folks again. Historically, it's been the people's lawyer, the lawyer who protects the environment, who goes after folks who violate workers' rights and consumer fraud laws. And then under Cuomo and before that, Spitzer became the sheriff of Wall Street. It's a job that's clearly going to have to continue to be done. But I think the next attorney general is going to have to focus on reform. That's how I view the office. That's why I left the comfort of private life, was to go be a catalyst for reform in Albany. We have a lot of problems in this state, and until we have our government responding to what the people really need, we're not going to solve those problems. And I think the Attorney General, the next Attorney General, has to be a key player in getting government working again.
Mr. Schneiderman, would you describe it the same way? Any difference in emphasis or anything from your two predecessors?
Well, it is the people's lawyer, and the Attorney General really, in my view, has the duty to speak out for people who can't speak out for themselves, to represent people against big institutions or corrupt government activity, and really fight to maintain the balance in New York State between the strong and the weak, the rich and the poor. So I view the Attorney General's office as really, in a more populist sense, as someone who has a duty not just to defend the state, but to affirmatively fight for causes, speak out for people who are being abused by mortgage fraud, who are being abused by debt collectors, who want public corruption rooted out in Albany. And it's really an important assignment. You defend the state, but the other part of the job is, in my view, is to be the advocate for people who can't afford to hire big lawyers by themselves.
Ms. Rice, same question. Why should people care about all of this?
Well, I think people should care because, as everyone has answered already, it is the people's attorney in a very pure sense. From a non-political standpoint, the Attorney General represents people in a way that levels the playing field for everyone, whether that is in a business sense, in a non-discrimination sense, the environment, women's reproductive health, civil rights. It's an enormously powerful office. But I think the one interesting thing about what people don't understand about the office, most people probably believe that the Attorney General can be the guardian and is the guardian of the public trust. Because right now there is no statewide elected official who's the guardian of the public trust. All of us in this race have spoken about I've released a public integrity agenda, as other people in this race have, and it has everything to do with reforming Albany. And I think that we have to give the powers to the Attorney General that most people think the Attorney General already has, to be that guardian for the public trust.
And Mr. Brodsky.
Well, it's the most malleable of the statewide offices. and it's been transformed in the past. It used to be just a defense firm from the state, then Louis Lefkowitz made it to a consumer advocate and a defense firm, and Elliot Spitzer turned it to the Sheriff of Wall Street plus consumer advocate plus defense firm. I think it needs another transformation, and I would suggest that the vision I brought to this is that it has to become the lawyer for the families across the state as they approach the problems they face in everyday life. I don't care if it's property taxes or MTA fares or the things that people experience as they go through daily life in communities across the state. Now the Attorney General has to turn his or her talents to those problems, not just the Albany-based issues.
Just very briefly, maybe 15, 20 seconds from any of you who wants to. Do you think you would, excuse me, do you think you would emphasize different things than your opponents here? Attorney generals do have a lot of discretion here, Mr. Brodsky.
Yes, I think that emphasis has been the notion that you transform the office into a place. Take mortgage fraud. It is good, and all of us will pursue the bankers who caused the problem. The Attorney General also needs to represent the people who would otherwise be tossed out of their houses. It is not just being the toughest gun on the street.
So you think you would do more of that than your opponents?
Well, at least in the context of the debates, that's been a distinguishing qualification or issue.
Who else, Ms.
I've
Rice?
raised.
Well, I've talked about putting more resources towards Medicaid fraud. It is one of the big, Medicaid is the single biggest expenditure in the state's budget. You want to talk about how you get the state back on sound financial footing. It is rooting out the waste, fraud, and abuse in a program like Medicaid. I started the first Medicaid fraud unit in any DA's office, and I think that's going to be, that's a way that the Attorney General can partner with the governor and get the state back on track.
Mr. Coffey?
Well, I think job one has got to be reform, because everything flows from that. It's not an end, it's a means. It's a means to get government working again. And I think I'm the only one really independent. Others here have made alliances with Albany insiders or are from Albany in order to try and get elected. I haven't done that. I'm the outsider. I'm right in the thick of this race, despite the fact that I don't have backing from public labor unions or any labor unions for that matter, even though I'm a son of labor. And I think I bring an outsider's viewpoint, independent, very skilled lawyer with determination to go up there and clean things.
But different emphasis, Mr. Schneiderman?
Yeah, I have a very detailed set of proposals on ericschneiderman.com, my website, including public integrity. But I view the office in a very fundamentally different way from my opponents here. I propose decentralizing the office, moving more assistant attorneys general out into the regional offices around the state. That would enable us to have a public corruption officer in every office in the state, because I do think that the public has lost confidence in the government, and we have to make it easier for people to report public corruption. A lot of times people will not go to the local prosecutors because they feel that, rightly or wrongly, they're a part of the local scene. So that's my proposal.
Mr. Dinallo, different emphasis from
I
your
was
opponents?
at the Attorney General's office and did the Wall Street cases that transformed that agency into the powerhouse that people see today. And my view is that a lot of the work we did was following up on Washington's shortcomings. And now I think you'll see Washington stepping up, and the future for the Attorney General's office is really inward for New Yorkers. The checks they write on their kitchen table every month, the consumer fraud cases, the prices they pay, the fees they pay, oil and gas, the things that really matter. I've campaigned in every county of the state. That's what they talk about. Show me how the office can help me in my life.
Okay. It is our Attorney General Democratic primary debate. If you're just tuning in here on WNYC, remember you can see this on live streaming video on our new politics site, itsafreecountry.org. And here to ask the next question is WNYC political reporter Bob Henley.
Thanks again for joining us. And in one of the earlier debates, District Attorney Rice, you said that there could be an instance where an existing state law, like the current prohibition on same-sex marriage, you would feel you could not defend as an act of conscience. Some of your colleagues took exception to your statement, countering that the Attorney General was duty-bound to defend all the state's laws, whether or not he or she found them moral or ethical. Could you all address this balancing between the personal ethical imperative and your professional obligation if elected Attorney General?
Bob, who do you want to go first?
Well, I guess District Attorney Rice.
I think that primarily the job, obviously, of the Attorney General is to enforce the law. But there are times when someone in the position of an Attorney General has to take a courageous stand on a law that may be discriminatory in nature. And I've spoken about the Defense of Marriage Act, and that's suing the federal government on the Defense of Marriage Act. There are people who are being discriminated against, and I believe that at times you have to take a stand, a courageous stand. I don't think that it's something that probably happens very often. But there's a difference between enforcing the law and defending the law. And yes, I will enforce the law as the Attorney General, but it's very difficult to defend a law that at its core is unconstitutional because it discriminates against one or more people.
Are there any other laws on the books, Ms. Rice, that you would refuse to defend as the state's attorney?
No, I've spoken about suing the federal government on DOMA, but no. Other than that, no.
It's an
Anyone else? Mr. Brodsky, go
It's
ahead.
an extraordinary dangerous concept. Two attorneys generals ago, or three, we had an attorney general who was opposed to reproductive freedom. He would have had a conscientious objection to defending laws on the state that guarantee women a right to reproductive choice. If we assert the principle that Ms. Rice, with whom I agree on the merits of her position, can decide not to defend that law because that's her political view, then when we elect, if that ever to happen, an anti-choice Attorney General, that law is also out the window. That is not the job of the Attorney General. We are the lawyer for the state, and lawyers represent people even when they've done the deed that we do not approve of. It is an extraordinarily dangerous path to tread.
Do any of the other three of you who haven't spoke disagree with Mr. Brodsky on that?
No, I agree with
Mr. Coffey?
No, I don't. I want to reinforce that I agree with Assemblyman Brodsky here. We're running to be the lawyer for the state. And whether you like it or not, the laws on the books are something you're required to defend. And as someone who's been in private practice and had to represent clients, sometimes I didn't really agree with what they had to do, but having been retained, my job was to zealously represent them.
So your position is clear. Mr. Dinallo, are you more nuanced on this?
This, I think, is clear. You do have a duty to represent, but you have to have a basis in the representation. So if, as the Attorney General, you think the agency has no constitutional basis, which Bob Abrams felt was the case in the Uplinger matter, then you should not defend the agency. And also, in very rare cases, which I could come up with, if you thought there was an unconscionable position, then you could recuse yourself from the case. So those are two strands.
Is there anything
unconscionable.
on the books right now, New York State, same-sex marriage ban or anything else?
No, I could give you a
hypothetical.
hypothetical. If you want a hypothetical, I can
No,
give you
I
a
want a
hypothetical.
real one.
But I don't think, no,
Is there a
as it
real
stands
one?
now, I'm not aware of any.
Mr. Schneiderman?
I have to say I disagree with Eric Dinallo and Ms. Rice on this. Look, 4 years ago when Andrew Cuomo was a lifelong opponent of the death penalty was asked this question, would you have to defend that law? He said, job one is defending the state. It is not, and I agree with Eric in the point that you are the counselor to the state and you can counsel your client. I think you should settle this. I don't think you should do it this way. But we don't have the ability to pick and choose. Look, for decades, the Rockefeller drug laws were the law of the land. I've been opposed them for years. I'm proud of the fact that last year I led the effort to repeal them. If I had been the Attorney General, I would have had to defend those laws.
Ms. Rice, what about those examples, the one he just gave about Rockefeller drug laws and the one that Mr. Brodsky gave, I think referring to past Attorney General Republican Dennis Vacco, who was anti-choice on abortion but upheld the law?
Well, I believe that this is the job of the people's attorney to make sure, I mean, you are the guardian of everyone's civil rights. Everyone deserves to be treated the same under the law. And if there is a law that allows for the disparate treatment of different people in this state, I think you're duty-bound to stand up and have the courage to say, this is wrong. And now, do I think that is going to happen very often? No, but we've seen instances in the past where it has. I have given an example of what law I think is discriminatory in nature, but this is, you know, we've seen history has shown people who have been courageous enough to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, this is discriminatory, and I'm not going to be a part of it.
We're going to go on to the next question now, and WNYC political reporter Ozzie Pabera has that.
How are you all? The state Democratic Party has described Albany as a swamp of corruption, and it's a party of which all of you are a member of. And I was wondering, starting on day one, if you were elected, what immediately could you start doing to help clean up Albany?
I'm happy to jump in on that. Sean Coffey. Well, again, I think it's job one. I have proposed a very detailed menu of things I think we need to do, not just the existing law, but new laws that we need. And new laws that I think we're going to get. We're going to get them because this Attorney General candidate has been out front from the very beginning. Others have duplicated much of my agenda since, to do things like take away the prerequisite that the Attorney General has to get permission to initiate a political corruption investigation. That's nuts that the AG can't do that. to ensure that we have full disclosure of what our legislators make in their outside jobs and who their clients are. No loopholes for trial lawyers, like the bill that Senator Schneiderman agreed to under pressure from his leadership, who happens to be a trial lawyer, and those types of things. We're going to get that because I expect and hope I'll be elected and I'll arrive in Albany saying this is what I want to do. But more important than what I'm going to say is what the folks who are listening are going to say. New Yorkers are very, very fed up. They want change. They're requiring everybody who's running to take a position on change. And when we show up in January in Albany, I think we have our best opportunity in our lifetimes to get meaningful reform.
Mr. Schneiderman, he mentioned you by name, so go ahead.
Well, Sean's charge is kind of ridiculous. I've been recognized as the leader of the reform movement. Citizens Union, the leading government watchdog group in the state for over 100 years, said I'm the candidate in this race who possesses the conviction and commitment to fight public corruption and to continue to advocate for reform, and that's continue to advocate. It's not a position I took when I decided to run for Attorney General. I've sponsored bills that close all the loopholes. You know, sometimes you get a half a loaf when you're negotiating bills. It didn't become the law. But I do believe even if we do not get the authority from the governor, there's a lot we can do, and I've focused very strongly on the issue of the Charities Bureau of the Attorney General's office and its ability to go after the abuse of not-for-profits. We now are seeing this as a problem in Washington, the federal government, as well as in New York State. That's something we can start on day one, and believe me, there's more cases to be made than the one that Attorney General Cuomo is making against Senator Espada.
Just to follow up with Mr. Coffey, can you say, starting day one, if barring those new changes to the law, what can you do with the current office as it is?
I will disagree with the predicate because I don't believe in saying, well, I'm not going to get anything. If you have that attitude, you're not going to get any new legislation. But if I pitch a shutout and I don't get, if I'm shut out and I don't get the new laws, you can be assured that I will aggressively use the laws that exist. For example, the Tweed law, the not-for-profit laws, and some of the other laws that we can use creatively. The real important thing is who's going to be the instrument of change, who is unentangled with Albany insiders. And I understand that Senator Schneiderman likes to boast of some endorsements, but those endorsements are more a victory of hope over experience. Senator, you have your fingerprints all over installing Pedro Espada as the Senate Majority Leader. You had an opportunity to stand up for true reform. Instead, behind closed doors, you orchestrated putting that man in power, a man who's an embarrassment to this state. Now, just a few days ago, we learned that the labor unions that are backing you have formed a committee the day after they would be required to report what they're doing before the primary for the purpose of supporting your election in ways that they won't report till after the primary. I don't want to make this an individual debate between Mr. Coffey and Mr. Schneiderman, but I am going to give you a chance to respond briefly to that specific charge about empowering Pedro Espada.
Yeah, thank you. The assertion is ridiculous. Pedro Espada came back with his tail between his legs. As soon as the announcement of the charges against him came out, I called on him to step down as Majority Leader. I'm the only person here who's endorsed his opponent, Gustavo Rivera, in the election that's coming up next week. Gustavo Rivera has endorsed me as the leading opponent of Senator Espada. I wish the rest of you would help out. Sean,
all right, now wait a minute. Have none of you endorsed Mr. Rivera against Mr. Espada? Is that a true fact? Ms. Rice, is that true in your case? Have you not endorsed Rivera over Espada?
No, I have not, but not because I don't do endorsements as the DA.
You don't do endorsements?
I have not made endorsements.
Any endorsements?
Yeah, I've talked to Gustavo. I've told him I support him. I think it's important to remove this man that, whether you want to say it or not,
right.
Senator Schneiderman
Mr.
helped
Brodsky, you're in the Assembly. You can make endorsements. Did you?
I have not made an endorsement in that race. So I understood the question. It was about what we would do to bring reform to Albany. Was that the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, then let me say this. First of all, I'm reluctant to go into any discussion where the phrase starting on day one is used, because the last guy who said that gave us a lot of noise and no action. This is not going to occur if we look at it as a chance to be rhetorically punishing on a lot of people we disagree with and only focus on sending people to jail, as important as that is. The real reform that will matter in the lives of New Yorkers will be reform of the MTA, reform of the tax system, reform of the electric system that's overcharging people. We can do two things at once, and I urge those who focus on reform to look at reform in the condition of lives of people as well as reform of the political class. We are very important up here in the political class, but we are not quite that important.
Ms. Rice, why would you be the best at fighting corruption?
Because I am not a product of Albany. Let's get down to what the issue is here. Issue number one is reforming Albany, restoring every single New Yorker's confidence in their state government. That is issue number one. Every one of us is talking about it. It's a question of who can get it done. I don't believe that an Albany insider can get it done. I think that we talked about this last night and brought up the issue that there are going to be inherent conflicts between two people, at least two people in this race, who have been in Albany, have been colleagues with people that they may be required to investigate. I don't come with any of those encumbrances. I'm actually the only person in this race who has investigated from a criminal standpoint members of my own party. I have shown that independence, and I've shown the ability to do that, and that's what we need in the next Attorney General.
And
that is the number one issue.
Mr. Dinallo, I want to give you a shot at that.
I think that the issue is the outside business interests of our legislature. I laid out a public integrity agenda. I think I was the first to do it, showing the laws that I would use to investigate members of the legislature on their outside business interests. And I think it is completely unrealistic to think that the members of the Senate and the legislature are going to give us the keys to their own incarceration. They're not going to pass a law expanding criminal jurisdiction over the Attorney General's office over them. And that's why I sent a letter to the governor saying that under the executive law, you can appoint, right now with a stroke of a pen, you can appoint the Attorney General's office, the public integrity prosecutor for this state, as was done in Medicaid fraud, and he should do it, and it would transform the agency and transform the state and restore confidence in the people, in their elected officials.
Just very briefly, 30 seconds each from Ms. Rice and Ms. Schneiderman, because everybody wants to be an outsider this year. But the Daily News today says, Mr. Schneiderman, you have openly courted the public employee unions, who many see as one of the biggest things that needs to be reformed. And Ms. Rice, you've been reported to have lots of campaign donations related to Sheldon Silver's law firm. Does any of this matter? Mr. Schneiderman, 30 seconds max.
I'm proud of the fact that I have the broadest, most diverse coalition of supporters from NARAL Pro-Choice New York and the League of Conservation Voters to labor. I would note that—
Is getting public employee unions endorsement in this year a good thing in New York?
No, I think that, look, let me note that my opponents sought the endorsement of these unions. I know Ms. Rice and Mr. Coffey traveled up to Albany to seek the support of the New York State Teachers Union. The fact that I've gotten more of the support, I think, is more a tribute to my effectiveness as an advocate. And look, I believe in the labor movement. I do believe in the rights of working people.
And Ms. Rice, on your donations that have been reported to be connected to Sheldon Silver's law firm?
Well, Sheldon Silver is supporting Mr. Brodsky in this race. So I do not have the support of Mr. Brodsky. Weitz and Luxembourg are two individuals who are Long Islanders who have supported me for 5 years since my first run for DA, and I'm proud to have that support. I just have to correct something that Senator Schneiderman said. I don't believe that anyone courted the support of 1199, which is the biggest union behind Senator Schneiderman, because they went with Senator Schneiderman without talking to anyone else. So I think that the entanglements that Senator Schneiderman has engaged in and has in this race show how incapable he will be to be a part of the reform that we need in Albany.
The danger in this conversation
Mr. Brodsky?
is that we are in a fiscal economic crisis caused largely by Wall Street. And a number of us here are apparently willing to pound the working people of the state as a consequence of that, as though the troubles we have were caused by them, or the problems we face can be solved by beating them up and making their lives miserable.
So you would take the public employee endorsements if you...
I have more public employee support than even the sainted senator. Now, let's be very clear here. The Senator Schneiderman has rolled out a string of endorsements. God bless him. A number of us sought those endorsements. They are politically consequential. They are generally what I would call the hard left of the Democratic Party. Good people, I share their points of view. But this is a big state. And Senator Schneiderman's insistence on running on issues that are, to some extent, fringe issues, like his refusal to support the civil incarceration of sex offenders, like his positions on a variety of things, like his willingness to denigrate people who have different positions than he on the mosque, seem to me to be relevant while we're spending our time beating up public sector.
Civil incarceration means keeping them past their jail terms if the officials deem them to be an ongoing threat. Mr. Sherman, just one more 15-second
I'm not trying to hog the time, but
if
these guys keep attacking me, I suppose I have to respond. I reject the premise. If you think that a fringe issue is protecting freedom of choice. I've been endorsed by NARAL Pro-Choice New York. I think you're wrong. If you think the environment and protection of the environment is a fringe issue,
and you know that's not
no,
what I
it's Richard. You said I have this coalition. This is my coalition, the League of Conservation Voters, New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. And just yesterday, I was endorsed by the Brady Campaign for Justice for my stand against the gun lobby. These are people, along with labor unions, along with public officials. Yesterday, I was endorsed by Congressman Anthony Weiner and Congressman Elliot Engel. If you think this is the fringe of the Democratic Party, I think you're just misstating the facts.
I didn't say that, and I want to be clear. I said those were progressive organizations that we all sought support of. What I did say is that in your campaign, not those organizations, you've taken some positions that are simply politically and on the merits unsustainable,
Okay, and
that's relevant.
you've enumerated those positions.
And I'm happy to respond to any of these
I
suggestions.
don't want to go round and round on each one of these.
I don't-
things.
I don't either,
Can I
but,
just
we're
take issue, Sean Coffey, or take issue with Senator Schneiderman's claim to the broadest coalition? Because anybody who could have the endorsement both of the New York Post and Senator Al Franken clearly has the broadest range of endorsement, which I'm proud to have both of those. And it's because of reform, because both of those, both that senator and the New York Post understand, conservative or liberal, the #1 issue facing the state is reform, and I'm grateful that they've each identified me as the best chance for reform.
This is our Attorney General Democratic primary candidates debate on WNYC. You can see this debate through live web video streaming. Go to our New Politics website, itsafreecountry.org. You can watch this debate, even as you may be listening to it on the radio, itsafreecountry.org. I don't want to get bogged down in the Islamic Community Center, as I think a lot of politics and the media have this summer, but it has divided one of you against the others, as I understand it, since Republican gubernatorial candidate Rick Lazio called on the state attorney general's office to investigate the funding. So briefly, Mr. Brodsky, I believe you're the lone voice in this group saying that was an appropriate and reasonable request.
I never said that.
Will you explain your position?
Surely. The varying positions of the Glenn Becks and the Rick Lazios have absolutely nothing to do with this debate as I've raised it. What I said is the following, that the legal rights of the Muslim community must be protected. The Attorney General must be willing to go to court to protect those legal rights. But there is a social fabric that also requires us as political leaders to be sensitive and try to work things out. If you take a strictly legal view, you end up with the Bloomberg position, which is that the community center mosque should be built there and they should be able to burn the Quran. Now, if we are going to lead this state and create a community in which we can all get along, the legitimacy of the views of the families of people who were murdered at that site must be part of the political dialogue. You can be for the building of the community center mosque without being a terrorist, and you can say it ought to be moved without being a bigot, and the debate so far has blurred those lines, but as though it was a fight between Fox News and MSNBC.
But on the role of the Attorney General,
the Attorney General will get this data as a matter of course, because the 501c3 will have to file with the Attorney General a complete list of who's contributing to this project. For the Attorney General candidates to say, I won't look at it, is ridiculous.
We're not saying we won't look at it. This is Sean Coffey. We're saying that the Attorney General has a great deal of power to upset lives by commencing an investigation. And there are four of us, the balance of the candidates here, take the position, and I hope I can speak for you on this, that until you see smoke, you don't look for fire. I mean, you don't start an investigation just because there's a politically charged environment. If there is evidence that, first of all, they're even able to raise money, because they haven't been able to yet, I don't think this thing's ever going to be built, and if there is evidence that it's linked to terrorist groups or anti-American groups, will any of us here investigate? Of course we will. And that's the narrow question put to these potential attorneys general.
Mr. Dinallo?
I agree. I was a prosecutor. I did money laundering cases, the very kinds of cases that you'd have to do here if there was evidence. I was at the Attorney General's office when the attacks occurred. We live downtown, so I understand the high emotions around it. But really, I actually believe that we should stop talking about this. I think it plays into the worst form of sort of pernicious religious schism, that the time we've spent during these debates on a potential investigation that you would only do if you had real evidence, because the power of a subpoena is the power to ruin, should really be set aside, and we should recognize where this is coming from. They're playing to our worst angels, and it is not good for the Attorney General's office to get sucked into that.
So Mr. Coffey and Mr. Dinallo agree with each other. Ms. Rice or Mr. Schneiderman, briefly, Are you right on the same page as them, Ms.
Yeah,
Rice?
I agree with them. I was a federal prosecutor on 9/11, and I know as many people, I think everyone in this race knew someone who was lost in that terrible terrorist attack. But I agree with what Sean and Eric have said from the perspective of the Attorney General's office and their role in regulating 501c3s. And this is, you know, everyone understands the sensitivity around this issue. But one of the freedoms that we enjoy in this democracy that we have to hold sacrosanct is the freedom to practice the religion of our choice.
Let me just follow up for a second with Mr. Brodsky. Imam Rauf and his wife already run a 501c3 nonprofit called the American Society for Muslim Advancement. Coincidentally, I just got a fundraising email from them today with an appeal based on the controversy. So based on what you said your job would be, how should Attorney General Cuomo be scrutinizing that organization's financing today, right now?
The same way he scrutinizes every other charitable organization registered with the Charities Bureau. My point is that this is not a situation in which the Attorney General will be sitting with a pair of blindfolds on and say, somebody show me the evidence. The names of the contributors will be filed with the Attorney General's office. I will look at that filing in much the same way I would look at any other charitable institution. I simply do not understand what my colleagues in this race would do if and when they get that information.
Mr. Schneiderman, very briefly.
I essentially agree with Eric, Sean, and Kathleen, but I'd like to take it a step further. The Attorney General has the power to enforce federal law as well as state law. I alone have proposed that the Attorney General take a role enforcing the Iran Sanctions Act, looking more carefully into New York institutions that move money to terrorists. But I've also proposed that the Civil Rights Bureau include for the first time a religious rights unit, because prejudice against people based on religious observations, Richard, is on the rise. And I agree with you that we should all be civil, but there are folks in this debate who are acting out of rank prejudice, and whether it's Orthodox Jews, Sikhs, or Muslims, we need a religious rights bureau of people with expertise in this area in the Attorney General's office so that we can acknowledge the prejudice that's out there and we can address it more effectively.
We'll continue in a minute. Mr. Brodsky, I'll give you the last word.
I
This
will
is your
not
issue.
permit my concern for this to be characterized, as Senator Schneiderman just did, as insufficient regard for religious liberty. I take second place to no one as to the rights of religious people or atheists, and this issue can be handled with that legal principle intact and still be sensitive to the community concerns that are on both sides.
With our New York State Democratic Attorney General primary debate. In a minute, this is WNYC, and we say hello to all the other public radio stations around New York State also airing this debate. Brian Lehrer on WNYC, live from the Greene space with our New York State Attorney General Democratic primary debate. Remember, listeners, you can watch this debate right now as a live video stream on our brand new politics website. It's afreecountry.org. It's afreecountry.org. The candidates are State Assemblyman Richard Brodsky, former federal prosecutor Sean Coffey, former state insurance superintendent Eric Dinallo, Nassau County DA Kathleen Rice, and State Senator Eric Schneiderman. And now you each get to ask a question of another candidate. Keep your questions to 30 seconds, please, and your answers to 45. Ms. Rice.
Well, I'm going to go back to a question that I asked last night of Senator Schneiderman, because I believe it's the core of the kind of reform that we need to see in our state government. Full disclosure from lawyer legislators, of which you are one, Senator Schneiderman. And I can tell you, for one, I think I'm the only person in this race who released my tax returns on April 15th. And I think that that is a great way to show the public that there's where your money is coming from, and that you have no conflict that may make it difficult for you to represent the people of the state. My question to Senator Schneiderman is, over the past week, he has put over $500,000, up to a total of almost $1 million now, into his own campaign. You have not released your tax returns. Do you believe that New Yorkers have the right to know, A, where that money came from, and B, if there's any conflict that could preclude you from doing the job of Attorney General?
Yes, and as I said last night, we'll release my tax returns. I'm sure they'll be out before the end of the week. The fact of the matter is, though, Kathleen, I have not been in private practice since, I think, 2000 or 2001, because my sense was that, not that there were legal conflicts, but that it was something that just I felt inappropriate. And I was a partner in a big law firm, a great law firm, Kirkpatrick & Lockhart, and did make a lot of money in private practice doing securities fraud cases and other complex litigation. I have nothing to hide. My tax returns now will reflect my Senate salary. You're very welcome to them, and I don't really think there's any question about disclosure. I also, again, have sponsored bills that we can't get through the legislature yet, maybe with a new governor and a new attorney general pushing for them, as I have been pushing for them, that would require full disclosure of clients who pay money, not just to lawyers, but to people as consultants.
Mr. Dinallo, who do you want to ask a question?
I just want to follow up on this issue of conflicts of interest that we discussed last night and underscore the importance of public integrity, and the public wants to see those cases being made. Now, I think that the issue about going back and investigating an institution you come from is a core legal issue. I maintain that DA Rice could not go back right now, having been the Nassau County DA, investigate the DA's office. I could not go back and investigate the insurance department if I became Attorney General. I don't think Sean could investigate a firm that he was the co-managing partner. Why do you think you're different, Senator Schneiderman? Why do you think you can get out of that legal responsibility and go back and investigate the Senate, where you were a leader, where you put the leadership in place, where the Senate is now said officially it's behind you? That's a legal prohibition. It's a conflict of interest.
Mr. Schneiderman?
First of all, thank you, my colleagues. I appreciate all the attention that I've been getting over the last few weeks as my endorsements and my support has been growing. But Eric, I just think you're flat out wrong on the law. I mean, that's like saying Sean couldn't go investigate corruption in the Navy because he was in the Navy once. The state legislature changes every 2 years. It's reconstituted. Look, I was a sitting state senator, and I chaired a committee that investigated and expelled Senator Hiram Monstro. That's while I was in the Senate with him as an independently elected attorney general. Unless there's a personal conflict, some matter that I was personally involved with, there is no prohibition on me going after corrupt elected officials, and I'm the only person here. I know Kathleen has prosecuted folks from the position of district attorney. I'm the only person here who stood up in the state legislature and said, we're going to start raising the bar, and I'm going to throw someone out who's corrupt.
Mr. Coffey, you get the next question.
Well, I think, Senator Schneiderman, the reason you're getting so much attention is that you're trying to put on the clothes of a reformer, and they don't fit. And you're being called on it. And just the fact that you cave to the trial bar, and your conference leader is a trial lawyer, and permitted this to gut the bill on disclosure and allow trial lawyers, and trial lawyers only, not to have to report their income and their clients. It's evidence of a troubling pattern of talking the talk but not walking the walk. Let me give you an opportunity to walk the walk. Several months ago, to great fanfare, you introduced a bill that would require each legislator to publicly disclose the entirety of their personal financial disclosure form. I had to fill one out as a new candidate. As soon as I filled it out, I put it up there. What they do typically is they redact out the categories of value. You can see what you have in terms of assets.
The question is?
Right. Well, you did it, and what would a leader of reform do? You would have not only trumpeted the bill and talked about how important it was to have transparency, you would have made your own available to the public. You haven't done it. And just if I may, I have noticed on the list of assets
I can't let you go on and on and on. So there's got to be a question in there, and it's implied.
The answer is simple. I have made an unredacted form available to the public. It's been on the blogs. I'm sorry you missed it. And again, though, the attack, the notion that I have not been recognized by the New York Times, the Albany Times Union, Citizens Union, and just today the New York Observer, as a champion of reform, as the most likely candidate in this race to bring about reform, because I don't just talk the talk, Sean. I never heard a word from you about reform in Albany until you decided to run for Attorney General. You gave money to candidates all over the country, state treasurers, controllers who your firm did business with. You never gave a dollar to a reform candidate running for the Senate or the Assembly. I was the chair of the Senate Campaign Committee. We tried to get support. You weren't there. This is a clear example of someone who has stood up for reform, which I have, who has fought for reform and paid the price when the leaders of both parties tried to redistrict me out of existence for my struggles, and been recognized by that's not my words, Citizens Union, the Times Union, the New York Observer, El Diario have all recognized my work.
One more question from candidate to candidate, and Mr. Brodsky, my inner Pat Kiernan, is saying it is not mandatory to ask a question of Mr. Schneiderman.
But it's fun.
I want you to have fun, Richard.
Ms. Rice. Putting aside the criminal justice issues that you've emphasized, in these debates I've tried to have a conversation about things that matter in the daily lives of New Yorkers. So putting aside the issues that you're associated with that affect criminal justice issues, what do you think those issues are?
I think they are protecting families, and it's what I've spent my entire career doing.
More specifically.
Can I get there?
Sure.
19 years as a legal advocate fighting on behalf of victims, of consumers, of taxpayers, of overhauling, for instance, if you want a specific instance, how retailers, big retailers in the state of New York, treat not only their employees but their consumers, taking on Walmart, the world's biggest retailer, and insisting that they put in place a safety plan that made it safer for every single consumer and employee, consumer who walked in the store and employees who work in that store, to be able to know that they can do that with complete safety. That is a safety plan that we created that set the gold standard for how retailers across this country are now treating the issue of public safety. That has everything to do with families. It is allowing people to feel that they have the protection of the law over them, and that big business is not going to be able to take advantage of them. This is maybe not something that that DAs do normally. It was not a criminal prosecution, but this is the kind of outside-the-box thinking that an attorney general has to engage in, and I have engaged in my 5 years as DA in Nassau County.
For our next question, we go back to WNYC political reporter Bob Henley.
Did I ask a question?
Everybody did. Oh, Mr. Schneiderman, forgive me. You did not ask a question.
Pose it to yourself.
It's a
Senator.
rare,
I apologize.
a rare moment of neglect. If I could pose a question to myself, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Sean, for the suggestion.
That's the thinking outside the box that I would bring to Albany.
Yes, or something else. Listen, I just want to go back, as Kathleen did, to something we talked about last night, because it's something that I still really don't get. Ms. Rice, you have acknowledged that you didn't vote for 18 years and acknowledged that you only registered as a Democrat in 2005 when you decided to run for district attorney in Nassau County. Coming back to the 2000 election, when you were living in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, when Al Gore was running against George Bush, did you not believe George Bush when he said he would appoint Supreme Court justices that would overturn Roe v. Wade and eliminate a woman's freedom of choice? Was there not anything in his platform that enabled you to see that you really should get up and get out and vote in a battleground state that year?
I have said that not voting was a mistake that I deeply regret. I have been very honest about that from the very beginning. But I'm a very proud Democrat, pro-choice, pro-marriage equality, anti-death penalty, tough on crime, progressive Democrat. We still exist, Senator. We're out there. I was proud when I beat a 30-year Republican incumbent, well-entrenched Republican incumbent DA in my home county of Nassau County. I became the first woman ever elected DA in Long Island's history, and I was incredibly proud to have been sworn in by Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, and very proud to have the support of that of a woman who represents fighting the good fight for all Democrats. So that is who I am, and I, unlike some people, talk about and admit when I make mistakes, and I'm honest, because people, you, the taxpayers, the voters, deserve that kind of honesty.
Well, this was fun, this round. I guess it's always going to be fun when we ask people running to be a prosecutor to ask a question of their opponents. So we thank you all. And Bob Henley does have the next question.
The Brennan Center has said that the state's limited liability company loophole in campaign financing permits the wealthiest contributors to end run existing spending campaign caps. The Brennan Center says this really is one of the things that makes the state's campaign finance laws meaningless. LLCs are often used in real estate, and the Attorney General plays a critical role in regulating the real estate industry. I think one wealthy donor actually used LLCs to give to 3 of you. This is a two-parter. One, should that loophole be closed? And if you've taken money from LLCs, would you feel bound to recuse yourself from deliberating on cases that involve that contributor?
Let's go right down the line. Mr. Schneiderman, real quick on this.
I've already I'm the sponsor of legislation to close the loophole. I have decades of experience fighting for public campaign finance reform and for full public financing of campaigns, which is the key to getting money out of politics. When I was the president of the Board of Citizen Action long before I thought about running for the state Senate. And I think that as far as recusal goes, you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. There are thousands of people who have donated to my campaign, and we'll look to see if there's a conflict of interest, whether it's an LLC, an individual, a corporation, or a union.
Ms. Rice.
Yes, I think the loophole should be closed, and I have proposed that in my public integrity agenda. I am very proud to have an incredibly broad base of support Half of my donors have given under $100. That is a very grassroots, broad base of support. I'm very proud of that. And I agree with Senator Schneiderman that any potential conflict that may arise because of someone who has supported you, whether that's an LLC or whether that's an individual who's given you $250, that's something that should be done on a case-by-case basis.
Mr. Dinallo?
I agree. The loophole should be closed. It's a horrendous situation for New York State financing of elections. We need public financing of elections. When I was at the Attorney General's office, I ran both the Investor Protection Bureau and the Real Estate Finance Bureau, and it was an issue. We had to screen for the Attorney General on the contribution basis, and it needs to be seriously looked at. And I've handled those conflicts of interest. I know how that office operates, but it would be a lot easier if we had public finance of the office.
Mr. Coffey?
Well, I just want to say at the outset that I'm a proud supporter of the Brennan Center. That's one of the things I was doing on the cause of reform rather than give to state senators. And given the performance of the state senate, I think that was a good choice. I would definitely close the LLC loophole. Senator Schneiderman, by my count, has received between labor PACs and LLCs well over $1 million from those types of outfits. I have called for, from the very beginning, public financing for two offices in particular in 2014. The Comptroller and the Attorney General. The two offices then, in my view, ought to be the least political. The person who counts our money and invests it for public pensioners, and the person who can put people in jail and cut a stock price in half with a press release. I think we need to do that as part of helping to restore trust in government, which again, I think is job one for the next Attorney General.
Mr. Brodsky?
I support closing the loophole. The conflicts need to be addressed case by case, but not just with respect to cases brought against them, but in many cases with respect to the attorneys who contribute, who may appear representing people. I would point out just this. Everybody here is for reform and nothing happens, except authority reform, which really did happen. The problem here is that the 2010 political conversation resembles the 2006 political conversation, which led to a lot of heat, a lot of anger, a lot of accusations, and no fundamental political reform. The next Attorney General will have to know how to operate in a political environment, not just be the fiercest gladiator in the arena.
We have about 3 minutes before we go to your closing 1-minute statements. So we're going to use it for a short feature that we'll call the checklist. Not quite a yes or no lightning round, but we'll ask you for very short answers to cover a fair amount of ground and let our audience know a little more about you and your thinking. I will enforce the pace. Maybe not all of you will get to answer every question in this round. Mr. Dinallo, what's the best and worst thing that Andrew Cuomo has done as Attorney General?
The best thing is continued the high-level work. People thought that the Attorney General's office after Eliot Spitzer couldn't get any more robust. I think he did a fabulous job there. Worst thing in my mind was I don't think he had to refer the investigation into David Patterson to outside counsel. The governor had already said he was not going to stand for office again. I think people should know that offices, investigations are done apolitically, and he should have kept it.
Anybody else think he should have kept it? He's by himself on that. What's the best and the worst thing that Eliot Spitzer did as Attorney General, Ms. Rice? Not as governor, as Attorney General.
I would say the best thing is show that there is a role for the Attorney General to play when there is an absence of federal regulation in an area that affects all New Yorkers. The worst thing is being a hypocrite.
I believe you're the only candidate, by the way, who has said that you would have prosecuted Spitzer for his use of a prostitute. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Nobody else would have, right? Okay.
It was in Washington, D.C. What's the state jurisdiction?
And
it's
I think
it's an easy shot to take, but the law requires us to have some jurisdictional basis.
Well, I come from specific experience in seeing that it's usually prostitutes who are charged and their patronizers who are not, and I think that's a double standard that we have to do away with.
In case I've not been clear, I'm against prostitution.
Okay.
But that's not the question. If you're going to say you're going to charge someone, you want to be the next DA, explain the statutory basis for it under New York law.
Other than Cuomo or Spitzer, who's your model as a New York State Attorney General, Mr. Schneiderman?
I certainly have a lot of respect for the work Bob Abrams did in the area of consumer protection, and I note, in spite of some of my colleagues' assertions to the contrary, he was a member of the state legislature who did go after both the Senate and the Assembly as Attorney General.
Mr. Coffey?
Bob Abrams.
Because?
Well, I think he really rounded out the people's lawyer part of the repertoire of the Attorney General with regard to civil rights, environment. he made that an even more active office than it had been under Lefkowitz.
All right, I'm going to let you go to your closing statements now. I want to thank everybody in advance. Does somebody not get an answer?
From the
From the
audience.
audience.
Our time is about up, except for the closing statements. Forgive me. We're going to now go to the closing statements, and we drew lots earlier. The order will be Brodsky, Coffey, Dinallo. No, that's wrong. Schneiderman, Coffey, Brodsky, Rice, Dinallo. Mr. Schneiderman, 60 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here today. I'm running for Attorney General because I believe that there is no higher calling than the pursuit of justice. My campaign has been run on a theme of equal, independent, and progressive justice, and that's how I would operate as Attorney General. I have never backed down from a tough fight, and I'm pleased to have been recognized for my work and to have picked up all the support I have because of my tenacity. I never back down from fighting the gun lobby, and that's why I've been endorsed by New Yorkers Against Gun Violence, and just yesterday, the Brady campaign. I've never backed down from my fight against people who had shut down a woman's freedom of choice, which is why I've been endorsed by NARAL Pro-Choice New York. I have fought against the leaders of both parties in the Senate who tried to redistrict me out of existence, and that reform work and my leadership in the reform movement has been recognized by the Albany Times Union, New York Times Observer, and Citizens Union, our good government watchdog group. If you want someone who will fight for reform, if you want someone who will never back down from a fight for the working men and women of the state, I seek your support in the primary next Tuesday.
Mr. Coffey.
I'm running for Attorney General because I think our state government is broken and I can help fix it. Briefly, my background, I'm the son of Irish immigrants, grew up in the Bronx, Niagara Falls, and Hempstead. Went to the Naval Academy in order to be able to go to college. Went to flight school, hunted Soviet submarines during the Cold War. Went to law school at night, decided that I could help people better by coming home. Worked at a big firm, was a federal prosecutor, became partner at a big firm, and then left that to go work at a small firm that took on companies that discriminated against African Americans and women, and also took on companies that thought they were above the law. I've taken on a lot of tough assignments in my career, and I think taking on the dysfunction in Albany should be my next assignment. I'm the only one who's running who doesn't really owe anything to anybody. I want to bring that tenacity to Albany. I want to not only go after corruption in Albany, I want to keep an eye on Wall Street. I've been called Wall Street's new nemesis. And I bring the broadest legal experience. I've been tried cases as a prosecutor, as a defense lawyer, and a plaintiff's lawyer. I ask for your support. I'm something different, and I think if you send me to Albany, you won't be disappointed.
Mr. Brodsky.
This is a race where I think it's clear that you have 5 people of varying temperaments and character, but all of them qualified to do the job. The real question is, what is the job you want the Attorney General to do? I propose that the office needs a further transformation. It needs to become the lawyer for the communities, the neighborhoods, and the streets. I don't care if it was Yankee Stadium or Jet Stadium or congestion pricing or corruption at the MTA. Those are the kind of fights that I have taken on successfully. For those of you who don't think reform in Albany is possible, look what happened to the public authorities of the state when we actually paid attention to people, came up with new ideas, compromised, did not demonize our opponents, worked with communities who could be mobilized in support of real change, and things really got different. That experience, that vision seems to me to be at the heart of what distinguishes my effort from that of my colleagues. I'm appreciative to WNYC for this opportunity, and I ask for the support of your listeners on September 14th.
Ms. Rice.
As the 7th of 10 children with 4 older brothers, I might add, I learned at a very young age how to fight, how to advocate on behalf of not only myself, but my brothers and sisters. And I have chosen a life in public service. I am not a career politician. I have spent my life as a legal advocate for victims of crime, child abuse, domestic violence, consumers, and taxpayers. That is what we need right now in the job of Attorney General. I am the only person in this race who has run a law enforcement agency. That's what the Attorney General's office is, who has made the legal decisions day in and day out, having to make the decisions on behalf of all New Yorkers. I have been that fighter my entire career. Public service is a passion for me. It is, I did not go to a high-priced law firm when others have done that, have taken that route. I have fought on behalf of victims and families and children my entire career. I want to fight for all New Yorkers, and I hope that you will give me that chance next Tuesday, September 14th.
And Mr. Dinallo.
all the candidates will tell you what they want to do with the Attorney General's office, their good intentions, and they do have certain qualifications for the job. But I'm the only candidate who was actually at the Attorney General's office, who did the Wall Street cases that transformed that agency. I was country before country was cool at the Attorney General's office. And then I headed an agency, the insurance department, of about the same size as the Attorney General's office, 1,400 people, also a law enforcement agency, expanded health insurance to 400,000 more New Yorkers, stood up to the banks there, stood up to the banks at the Attorney General's office and the health insurers, returned millions of dollars to policyholders, and made that agency into a national figure protecting people on their insurance policies. I've been a consumer watchdog, I've been a prosecutor, I've supervised cases in over 40 counties of this state. If your listeners want someone who can go in that office and immediately continue the high-level work and expand it, then I'm the right candidate for them based on my qualifications as a predictor for the future.
Well, I want to thank all the candidates for coming to the Green Space today and having this debate. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate everybody who participates in the democratic process. Good luck to each of you next Tuesday. We hope to have one of you back to debate Republican Dan Donovan for the general election. Listeners, on our new politics website, itsafreecountry.org, we are now putting up a poll: who won this debate? It's an informal, unofficial, thoroughly unscientific online poll, but we have a lot of likely voters in our audience, so who knows, you might even learn a thing or two. Who won this debate? And of course, you can do more than vote, you can react with your comments. Go to our new politics website, itsafreecountry.org, itsafreecountry.org, itsafreecountry.org. The Brian Lehrer Show is produced by Lisa Allison, Jody Abergen, Paige Cowett, and Rachel Senator. Our interns are Raphael Vera, Alec Hamilton, and Sam Dishy. Megan Ryan is our senior producer. Richard Ye produced the debate today with help from John Keefe, Kate Hines, and Melinda Worley. Debbie Fountain and Jason Isaac have been running the boards. And as always, thanks to the entire team in the Green Space. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm Brian Lehrer.